other class, the gaming classes, got me really overwhelmed. The speed of the class is really fast.
Let's see. So just so you guys can kind of get the idea of dealing, ooh, wrong version of Maya, not 16, I want 17. Okay, there we go. Yeah, that's right. All right. The differences between Mudbox and Substance Painter is a few different things. So, actually, not that I don't like the light, but I think it might be kind of diminishing the projector a wee bit.
Yeah, the natural light's nice.
It is nice, it's just, there we go. Is that a little better? Okay. I do like it, but yeah.
Now, Professor, when we start up Mudbox, usually Mudbox opens up an option like it processes like what do we want this texture, like a head? Or
Yes. So when I first start Mudbox, it gives me the option of whether I want to start with one of their pre-made primitives or do I want to actually bring in my own model. So like this was a model I brought in and then textured inside of Mudbox. Right?
And you can use Mudbox for rigging also, right?
Not rigging, no. It is simply sculpting and painting. So,
But after you rig something, then you can bring it in and use.
not in Mudbox.
But after you can bring this into Maya and then do rigging in Maya.
The total thing of what happens, the workflow, not to get too derailed because it's totally different, but if let's say I have a character, I might model out my low-res version of the model in Maya, bring it into Mudbox, subdivide it, sculpt it, get it as detailed as I like, and it'll probably be like around 8 million polygons or so. Then I'd bring it back into Maya. I would retopologize it, making a low-res version. So I'd have to remodel it based off the high-res. UV map the retopologized version. And then transfer the normal information from the high-res to the low-res. And then the low-res version I would rig.
Wow. Oh, that's complicated. 8 million polygons. Wow.
Because that's the only way I can get the details that I would want. But
And Professor, is it true that the more polygons there are in the model, the more smoother the model is?
yes, that's when you subdivide it and then get the details up. So when I'm dealing with a model like this where I have these multiple textures and stuff, this is basically how Mudbox works. Very similar to Photoshop, where I have all of these different layers that are on top of each other that make like the skin, the makeup, specularity, all that kind of stuff. Okay. And on top of it, I can subdivide it and sculpt it. So I can add a lot more details. When I'm dealing with Substance Painter, there is no sculpting. There's just painting and making materials and doing cool stuff like that. So Substance Painter goes in with the idea that your model is finished. It just needs to be pretty now and textured. And how detailed I get into it is entirely up to what I'm trying to do. So, case in point, when I open up, yes, I know. Like the table that I'd brought in. So, regardless of which one of these I'm working in, it goes off of the idea that my model is UV mapped. Okay? Whether I'm in Mudbox or whether I'm in Substance, I have to have a clean UV map before I start texturing it. Mudbox has this one thing that you can do if you're doing a high-res texture and you have a monster machine to handle it, that you actually can texture it without UV mapping it by creating what's called a PTEX texture. And what it does, you have to have a pretty decent machine to pull it off, depending on the complexity. So like right now, my character, you know, her head is totally UV mapped out, right?
So something like my computer, would that be sufficient?
Depends on the complexity of the model. What a PTEX is, and you could see it's like PTEX setup under the settings here, is a PTEX would take every face of your model and in the UVs separate every single one and lay them out. So instead of having, like in this case, I have 3 UV shells, one for the head, one for each ear. Every polygonal face would be separated and laid out, and therefore I could paint on them. But that you'd only do that if I am like painting a high-res model and then I want to transfer the textures to the low-res. And then it will project the texture onto the low-res model after it's done, and you have to have a pretty decent amount of resources to pull it off, especially if that model is super dense. Okay? So, but there is that option if I'm going from high-res to low-res model. And I want to texture the high-res and then transfer those textures to the low-res version. Because trying to UV map an 8 million polygon model, if you just sculpted it out of nowhere, can be a pain in the butt. And if I started it with a low-res version that I subdivided, then the UV maps would, unless I sculpted, like did a lot of weird radical changes to the sculpture, they would still be intact when I subdivide it. But if I'm going to go in, and we could see like this table I brought in, and you see I made like little finger smudges on it and stuff, you see that? Oh, those darn kids. So there's all these little handprints and stuff and little smudges that are, you know, kind of scattered throughout. They're subtle, but you can see them, see? But it allows me to do a lot of cool things with it. Provided that, once again, everything is UV mapped.
What would you use PTEX for along with if you're going from high-res to low-res, especially said something like if you want to texture without the model?
Without the UVs.
If you want to texture without the
That's really the only time. And it's really only if you're doing a high-res version and then you plan on transferring that information to the low-res that is UV mapped. I don't use it. I just UV map my stuff whenever possible. I haven't had a situation where I've had to do that in my production line, you know, pipeline, but that is what it's there for. So if I assume everything is UV mapped, I'm just going to walk through this again just to make sure people are okay with it. Because one of the most powerful things about Substance is the fact that depending on the model I'm trying to do, I can actually create some really quick, nice textures, and this is how they're doing it for video games now, because they have so many assets and all these high-res textures, and texturing can take a lot of time. right? So if I go in, let me, and this is another thing, I think I'll just make the video. I won't go over it today. But what this is making what's called an ID map. So I'll talk about what it is, but I'm not going to go over it just yet. What an ID map is imagine that in my scene, I have a bunch of objects that have the same treatment, but they're different objects. And what I mean by that is, I'll demonstrate it with the coffee table. So imagine in my scene, I have 3 pieces of furniture that are different shapes, but have all the same materials. They all have the same wood. They all have gold metallic trim in certain areas, and they all have a lacquered shiny surface, like the surface of the top of the table. Now, rather than me take every single one of those models, these 3, 4, 5 models in my living room, and have to retexture every single one, I define that these pieces of furniture all have wood, gold, and this glossy glass or like lacquered surface on it. And I basically make a color ID that defines those. So in other words, everywhere it's wood, I'm gonna make a red color. Everywhere it's gold, I'll make a yellow color. And everywhere it's that lacquered surface, I could use a green color. So, whatever colors I designate. And I make an ID map for all of those surfaces. And in Substance, I make what's called a smart material. So what I would do is I would take that one of them, use the ID map, and define that, yep, gold is yellow, red is wood, blue is shiny, plasticky, whatever surface. And I set it up on that one object and make a master material that identifies that. And when I bring in those other objects, I just assign it to them, and it automatically will put the wood where the red is, the gold where the yellow is, and this shiny surface where that is. So I don't have to redo it every single time. I just make an ID map that defines this is where those things are.
So it's basically like if you want to use the texture on this, so basically if you want to know which textures belong to which object that is the same shape, then you use the ID map. And the way ID map works is that basically you are proving that the texture indeed does belong to the object by adding some color associated with it.
You're associating a material with a color per object. Another idea, the way they do it is if I have multiple characters, like, okay, this game has a bunch of like cool space marines with these armor, or robots with armor, right? And they have different materials on them. In their midsection, they have this like rubbery surface. Up here, they have this colored metal that has some rust or just whatever, but they may have different colors to it. And their heads have like this shield that's one material and this is another. And I make one of those characters, and then I detail out exactly how I want it to look with all these different materials assigned to different parts. But I define the materials by the color coding of the metal is this color, the rubber is this color, and I define all those. And I make a smart material, and that's why it's smart. Because it looks at the ID map and says, oh, metal is red, rubber is this is this. And as long as those other characters have an ID map that has those defined, all I have to do is now just drop that smart material on all those other characters, and it's just going to put it scaled, placed exactly the way it should on all the other models based off the ID map. Does that make sense?
So it's basically like you're basically you're assigning each material to a color, and basically like for example, if you wanted to create couple of alien characters that are of the same shape but have different colors. Like for instance, you want to create like a blue alien and then a yellow alien and then a red alien.
Well, and then the cool thing is that I can always change it once it's on there, because with Substance, I just can tweak out any of those parameters, but it put it exactly where it's supposed to be. So it saves me a lot of time. It takes a little longer to set it up, but then I can actually do some really cool stuff with it. Now, I'll make a video of that for the for this week coming up. But for right now, what I want to show you is, let me set it to this, open, and let's open you up. You always have an error. Okay. Still thinking. Load me up. There we are. Okay, so here is my little entertainment center here. Right? And I have, yeah, I have all these pieces here that are laid out that I want to apply. Okay, the textures too. So I want to send this into Substance and change some things on it. So I'm going to take this one scene here, or this one object. It's already UV mapped. I'm just going to delete. It's always a good idea to delete history off of things before you start bouncing them around, doing stuff with them, so they're nice and clean. And I'm going to export this out. File, export selection. Save it into my FBX Files folder that I created. And export that out. And now I can go into Substance and say I'm creating a new substance. And here it's asking me some questions. Okay. What kind of material do I want to use? And this is depending on my output. So am I going like right here, for instance, there's an option for Unity 5. So if I was going to send this to Unity, it's going to make the textures and the texture naming convention that is appropriate for Unity, so that when I send it out, I'll know where, much easier, how to plug it in and where to plug in the textures. Unreal 4, here's one for them. I'm going to choose PBR metallic roughness. I'm going to select the mesh that I want. There it is in the FBX file. Files folder I've made. Normal map based off of DirectX, that's fine. What resolution do I want to start with? I'll start with a 2K. And down here, import normal maps and baked maps for all materials. So if I wanted to create ambient occlusion, a curvature map, stuff like that, then I would have made those in Substance Designer. And then this is where I would bring them in and then connect them. Do you guys want me to show you how to do that part real quick if you're going to use them? Here's the big deal with why that's important. If I'm going into a game engine, ambient occlusion is pretty good to use. I can attach it there to add more depth and shadowing into my materials to make them look more realistic. The one I get excited about is ones I get excited about are the normal maps and the curvature maps. I love ambient occlusion too when I'm doing stuff, but the curvature map really works well inside of Substance, because what it does is it looks at the edges of a model and where the curves are. And when I'm using a smart material, a lot of the effects, like where is the metal going to wear off, where's the paint going to chip off, where's the rust going to start to grow or start to appear, is based off of the curvature map. So when you see armor or a box, you notice that like a metal box or filing cabinet, the rust never happens at dead center of a surface, does it? It happens towards the corners and the edges. And so that's where I would create a curvature map if I want to have something start to have wear and tear, or where it's corroding, or where it's starting to break down, is through that. Do you guys want me to show you that real quick, or does... Yeah? Okay. So I'd have to open up Substance Designer. And once again, this is a part of that package, the Substance package that you'd get. It would be Substance Painter, Substance Designer, and Bitmap to Material, which if you're making tiling seamless textures is really awesome. Substance Designer is where I would build these bigger materials. I haven't really dipped into that part of it that much yet, because I will be quite frank, building materials in Unreal, building materials in Maya, there's only so much that you want to actually focus on at once, even though you could do powerful things. And there's a part where you just start to get really drained of like, okay, in this program it's this, and in that program it's that, and in this, yeah, it's like I'll cross the bridge when I get to it. But what I do love about it is the maps that it spits out. So inside of Substance Designer, we have Create, and once again, I create a new substance. And I'm just going to do it temporarily so I can actually make the maps that I want. So I'm going to use the same one, a physical-based metallic roughness map. And I can name it whatever I want. It says new graph. I could just say entertainment center 2048 by 2048. All this is, I'm not going to spend much time in here. I'm just passing through to make a material or a couple of textures. So I'm going to hit OK. And it opens this up. And we could see, depending on the material I create, I will start to see what it's doing in here. So the difference between this and Substance Painter is Painter, I paint and I use the materials to create awesome textures. Designer is where I would design the materials that I would use in Painter or in Maya or in Unreal. So this creates the material shader. Substance creates the textures from those materials and all that kind of stuff. So, but what I'm going to do right here, this is where I would start to connect all the attributes and everything. I'm not even going to worry about that. What I want to do is go to where my FBX file is. And there's my updated entertainment center that I want to bring in. And I'm just going to drag it over here so it makes a resources folder. And there it is. So I literally dragged it into the unsaved package. There's my FBX. This is also where I would generate, and it does really good job of it, making normal maps. So if I have that high res model we talked about and the low res, and I want to make the normal map for it, inside of here is where I could generate it, and it'll be really clean and look good. I take my high res model, my low res model, and bring them in here, and I would say, you know, make the normal maps as well. I don't have a high res, it's a simple entertainment center, but if I did have a high res model that had sculpted all sorts of stuff, here's where I would do it. So I've got that down, and here's my texture, and I right click on it, and right here it says bake model information. So I'm going to click on that, and it pulls this up. And this is basically where I bake out those textures, the curvature, the ambient occlusion, any of those maps I wanted to make. Bakers is the ones that are essentially what it's generating, right? So right now, based off of what I did last time, I have an ambient occlusion and a curvature map. And the properties are telling me what it would actually do. So let me details. Well, I'm going to crank that up to a 1. On the curvature map, ambient occlusion, I have the quality at high. There is a level of testing it to see, you know, a little bit of trial and error of some of the tweaks. But right here in the bakers, let me show you that. Right up here, you see this little button, the little plus, is where I could choose all the different maps I could kick out of here. Ambient occlusion map from mesh. And you'll notice normal map from mesh and all that kind of stuff. What that basically means is that I'm baking from a high-res model to a low-res model, right? So I would bring in not just my low-res, but my high-res. And what it's saying is, oh, so on this character, you have a 8 million poly high-res model that you want to make ambient occlusion that's going to show on a low-res to make it look good. So whenever you see from mesh, it means I'm taking that information from a high-res and I'm dropping it to a low-res. That's not the case right now. So ambient occlusion, curvature, most of these are from mesh. So those are really the only ones I want right now. The only ones that are appropriate. So I've got my ambient occlusion, got my curvature. Over to the right, I'm plugging it into, where do I want to plug this into? What folder do I want to spit them out? So I'm sending it to the source images folder of my project. And right here is where it's telling me what the name is. So right now it's naming it based off of there you are. Let's move you out of the way. It's based off of that name I typed, or the name of the FBX. So it's saying updated entertainment center, ambient occlusion, and then there'll be updated entertainment center, curvature, and so on and so forth. I can change that if I wanted to right here, but I think that's fine. Long name, but I would just change the mesh name right before underscore if I wanted to. So if I wanted to, I would just change the name right here and type in, like, let's say EC for entertainment center. And you see now it's EC ambient occlusion. It would be EC curvature map, EC normal map, so on and so forth. Make sense? So we've got that. I've got the resolution based off of what UV set. This one only has one UV set. If I had that light map UV set, I would generate it from that, which would be UV1. And I think everything is looking good. I'm spitting it out as a target file. And we just hit OK. And what it did, there it is there. It created my ambient occlusion and my curvature map. And that's all it is. That's all I needed. But now, if I go back into Substance, here's where I'd add those maps in. And I go to my source images. And I want to view it a little differently so it makes life a little bit easier. List by date modified. And there they are right here. EC ambient occlusion, EC curvature. I'm going to grab both of those. Hit open. And then they pop up right down here. Okay. Now I just hit OK. Alt, left mouse button, and there it is. To make sure that they're linked, right down here in the texture set settings is where I connect them. Select ambient occlusion map. Boom. Look at that. Did you notice the difference? So now the ambient occlusion map is baked in, or put in there. Select curvature map. Boom. We don't see a difference because I'm not using a material that's using the curvature map. But what you could see is I plugged those in, and I would do the same for the ID map, normal map, etc. And now I'm ready to texture it. It has the ambient occlusion in there. Just so you can see it again, if I get rid of the ambient occlusion, look what it looks like. Get rid of it. Without ambient occlusion. With ambient occlusion. Okay. And now I'm ready to start my texturing, which are going to be a lot easier by dragging stuff into my layers. Go to my materials. I know this is a wood, so I'm just going to drag my wood right into my layers so I could start with that. For the most part, they're laid out okay. There's a few I want to change. But before I start changing them, I'll tweak this out so it looks like the wood that I'd want it to be. And the only things I need to really change are the grain is going in the wrong direction on certain pieces. Does that make sense? You have to be careful of that with wood. The grain should go like, case in point. The grain going up and down here is okay, except for the fact it's going 90 degrees different on this one. So, and in here. So it doesn't make sense that the grain is going up and down here, left to right here. So I'd want to rotate both of these 90 degrees. Does that make sense? So it's little things like that that'll make it like, ooh, that doesn't look right. You know? Now, I have two options of doing that. I could just go into my UVs in Maya and update it so that those UVs are rotated 90 degrees. Or I could just make a new version of the material and rotate it and apply it only to those faces. Right. So, any questions so far? Yes.
So you created the ambient occlusion and the
Curvature.
curvature in Substance Designer, but does it do it differently than Substance Painter does? Because I know you can bake those things in from Painter as well.
You can. I found that Designer is a little more accurate. The question of like whether you can create those inside of Painter. I just found that Substance Designer tends to be really fast and it does a really good job and give me more options when it's generating those different maps. And depending on, like, if I turn this one off, let's go to a smart material for a second, and we'll see if the curvature map actually did what it was supposed to. It's not that complicated of a model, so it's only going to give me so much. But if I bring in this, yeah, it's a little weird. So I'd probably have to adjust the settings of the curvature map itself. Because the, let me see, large. This is the curvature map. And it looks like I'd probably have to adjust it a little bit more, but what would happen typically with this machinery material is a lot of these different effects are based off of the curvature map itself. And what that essentially means is that when I actually go into some of its settings here, the generators are working off of the curvature, right? So when you actually look at how it's actually affecting it, it's looking at where some of these edges would be. And then when you actually go into the parameters of these individual masks and how the dirt is actually appearing and where the surfaces are, it's these generators that are actually adjusting things and how much you're seeing it. Let me see if I can crank it. Yeah, it's a simple model. That's why it's not giving me a whole lot. See if I can crank it out a little bit. Yeah, I think I'd have to actually go a little bit into it. Oh, because it's also looking at normals and stuff like that. But basically what I'll show you with a different model, but the general idea is that when I would actually create that, it's going to look at where these edges and the curves are, and that based off of the curvature, that's where it's actually going to start to add different elements to it, like, and then I could actually use different different effects based off of its angles. But you could see, like, oh, cool, I could do some different things, you know, with the scratches themselves. How much they're being affected by the ambient occlusion, how they're being blended, what's their contrast, what level of detail they are, etc., etc. But right now, what I'm more worried about, I'm just going to right-click on this one. Or actually, I don't have to right-click, I just select it and just delete it. Turn on my wood again. And then go into the properties of the wood over here. And then change what kind of color and how much I want that wood. How rough is it going to be? The fibers of the wood, how many layers. So this is where you start to fine-tune everything as much as you want, including the luminosity of it. If I want it to be like a darker wood, that looks kind of cool like that. The contrast. I can even change the hue and saturation of it. How strong are the normals? Or the height range? So I can make all this, you know, with the adjustments that I want and say like, oh, that's kind of neat. As well as I could change the UV scale. Like so. See? So if I say, you know what, I like it like that, kind of feeling that, looks kind of cool, then what I would do is I'm just going to do it this way. I'm going to take this guy, and I like to kind of group things together, so I'm just going to go in and make a little folder, and I'll call this one wood horizontal, and drag this material right in there. So see, I can just turn that group off and on. And then I'm going to make another group, or another folder, pull it out of there. I don't want it in there. Call this new one wood vertical. And the whole idea is that I'm going to have a version of this wood that's rotated 90 degrees. So I take this guy. Here's my material that I have here. Right click on it. And I can do a few things. I could just duplicate it. And then that duplicate I put into the vertical. And I'm going to hide the horizontal one for right now. And what I want to do to the vertical one is literally go over to the right side and change the UV rotation to 90. And you'll notice now how it changed. You see that? So now some parts I like a lot more now, like the inside of here and right there. Maybe there. But there's other parts I don't like. Okay. So all I have to do now that I have this one, if I turn on the other one, you'll notice they're overlapping on each other. And what I want to do is I want to hide parts of the horizontal, so it's only the vertical is visible. So on the horizontal one, I'm going to right click on it and add a white mask. And I'm recording this, so don't feel bad. And now I just have to mask out the areas that I want the vertical to show by itself. So I have the mask selected. I go up to the top here. Polygon Fill. And this is a way that I could select polygons that I want to fill an area. So what I would do now is make my fill black, which means it'll hide the horizontal version. And then I just choose Polygon Fill, and then I can just go boop if I wanted to change certain things. Right. And I'll show you in a second a way, like I'll just flip this so it's not, so it's actually working okay. But what I'm going to do is I'm on this one and I'm just going to say, oh, you know what, on the horizontal one that's viewed, I just don't want it to be showing here. Or here. And I just go in and choose the ones that I want it to be vertical on, that aren't showing as vertical. Let me turn this off right now. It's driving me nuts. Okay. Okay, so that looks like that's doing all right. Now, what I'm going to do with this one is I'm just going to let's see. Let's just do this. And I'm just applying I want to kind of flip that. So now that I've actually blacked out the vertical, I've added a black mask to that. So right now, this one isn't being shown at all. But now I can just go back in and say, oh, you know what? I want to paint you guys white so that you're only showing up on these. And the reason I did it that way is because of the fact that I didn't want the normal map to show. So basically I have, if I turn these off and on, so this one is my vertical, or excuse me, this one's my horizontal map. And this one is my vertical, where I made the corrections. And now it has all the textures going in the direction that I want them to go. Does that work? If I wanted to add something to it, like a metal material here or something like that, then I would make a brand new layer and then put that on top of it. So in other words, I'd go in, go to my materials, and say, oh yeah, I want brass or something to be on. When I drop it into here, of course it's going to go, hey, wait, that's kind of weird. And I'd mask the whole thing out.
Yeah, try gold. That would be a fun one to try.
Cool thing, once you have this, you can change it to whatever you want it, but it's like, so I have that, and then I would just go in and apply it only to the parts that I wanted, if that were the case. And then I just mask out the other ones so that they're not affecting it and they're not layered on top of each other so you don't get the wood bumpiness. See? Last thing before I'd export this out. So I'm making all these layers. It's a lot like Photoshop. I have layers on top of each other. I can make a brand new layer. Pull it on top of everything if I wanted to. And then say, oh, you know, maybe there's some cuts or something, or scratches. And that last part would be on this layer on top. I'm just going to pick something simple where I go to brushes. I'm going to choose like, oh, cracks. So right now you can see here's the brush here, right? But so it's a good pattern, but I don't like how it's working. Control right mouse button, drop this down in size. Control right mouse button forward and back is the intensity. Left to right is the scale. And then I give this the properties I want. Now here's the fun part. I want it to be a tannish color. Like a tannish orange. I want it to bump down, so I'm going to go to the negative in the height map. And I don't want it shiny, so I'm just going to pull the roughness to the right. So now if I were to put that in there, let me increase the intensity. See that? Where it's like you get this little bump in. If I wanted it to be that same thing, but maybe a different pattern, like this. And that's all in a layer, so it's non-destructive. Fibers, dust. So this is how I can weather things out. But that's all within a layer. And I can either bump it up or down. So if this is supposed to be stuff that's clumping up, I would just raise the height. See? Like, ew, what's that? Or if I'm trying to get water damage or something like that. And once I'm all ready, then I'm ready to spit out the textures to this. Save this out first.